When I first started doing movie-themed video essays on YouTube, one of the first things I decided was that I was going to prioritize making videos about topics that I was interested in instead of ones that I felt were more likely to attract clicks. There are already plenty of channels out there doing deep dives into the latest Marvel or DC thing that just came out, and I was personally happy making videos about niche topics like the editing techniques used in a French cult film from the early 2000s, or my love for the ABBA jukebox musical franchise. And besides, the discussion around all the major blockbusters these days is getting so exhausting and toxic that I just didn't want to dip my toe into that water. With all that being said, who wants to talk about The Last Jedi?
This is where the fun begins.
So to start with, let me give you an idea of my relationship with this movie, and really with the Star Wars franchise as a whole. Like a lot of people, I was introduced to this franchise at a very young age. I think I must have been about 5 when I saw the original trilogy on DVD for the first time. So it's been a part of my life for a very long time, is the bottom line. And when The Last Jedi came out and I saw it in cinemas, my initial reaction to it was that it was good. There was definitely a lot about it that I really appreciated, and I had enjoyed myself, but I wasn't sure about a lot of the narrative choices that were made, and I didn't love it at that point as much as The Force Awakens. Where most people either absolutely loved it or absolutely hated it with every fiber of their being, I didn't really fall into either camp. I was very much in the rare middle ground. But I've seen The Last Jedi a few more times since that initial viewing, and I love it more and more each time. Now I consider it to be easily the best thing to come out of the Disney era of Star Wars, even though I do have a soft spot for The Mandalorian, and one of the best installments in the franchise, just full stop. Things that annoyed me about it the first time just ceased to annoy me after a couple of viewings, and I really came to appreciate certain things that I hadn't noticed the first time. In that way, it's the exact opposite of The Rise of Skywalker, which I also thought was okay at first, but really grew to annoy me over time, and just has not held up on repeat viewings. So in this video, I want to talk about why I love The Last Jedi, and why I think it deserves more appreciation from the fanbase than it gets. And to be clear, if at the end of this video you still don't like this movie, that's fine. It's valid. Just as long as you aren't one of the people who bullied the cast and crew online because they made some choices you didn't agree with, in which case you are a fucking child and need to go touch some grass. Okay? Since I have so much to say regarding this movie, I've just split the video up into different sections, each one referencing a different talking point that I want to discuss. So without further ado, let's get into revisiting and defending The Last Jedi. May God have mercy on my comment section. In my opinion, one of the strongest aspects of The Last Jedi is the way it develops its characters, taking them to interesting and unexpected places. Let's talk about this with regards to some of the major players, starting with the most hotly contested aspect of The Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker. In the original trilogy, Luke is a naive farm boy who grows into a powerful and confident Jedi Knight. He's a noble hero who never gives up, brings his father back from the dark side, and restores hope to the galaxy. So it was quite a shock for fans to see him return in The Last Jedi as a cynical old man who had retreated from the fight and lost faith in the Jedi Order. Many saw this as a betrayal of his character, but I could not disagree more. Firstly, it humanizes Luke. Instead of painting him as this infallible paragon of heroism, who has no faults whatsoever, the movie gives us a broken man plagued by insecurities and haunted by his failures. That's a much more interesting direction in which to take the character, if you ask me. But more importantly, it's actually completely consistent with Luke's character in the original trilogy. How, you ask? Why would the incorruptible Jedi, who saw goodness in a man everyone else thought to be beyond redemption, ever come close to killing his own nephew? Well, if you ask me, that's a fundamental misreading of not just The Last Jedi, but Return of the Jedi. Allow me to explain. Yes, Luke spends much of Return of the Jedi convinced that he can bring Darth Vader back to the side of good, and he eventually succeeds. But he also comes close to killing him in a moment of pure, uncontrolled rage when Vader threatens Leia. Ultimately, he stops himself, knowing that giving in to this instinct would bring him closer to the dark side. And this is also exactly what happens in The Last Jedi. Luke senses overwhelming darkness in Ben Solo, and fears that he will go down the same path as his grandfather. That he will destroy everything and everyone Luke loves and fought so hard to protect. So for an incredibly brief moment, Luke is tempted to kill Ben and draws his lightsaber, but he stops himself immediately. He's horrified and ashamed that such a thought would ever even cross his mind. Luke has always been impulsive and has always had trouble controlling his emotions. Just because he found a way to ignore those impulses before doesn't mean he will never have them again. That's just human nature. In both cases, his actions were driven by determination to protect the ones that he loves. And as for Luke losing his faith in the Jedi Order, well, when you think about it, he's not entirely wrong for feeling this way. For all its faults, one genuinely interesting element of the prequel trilogy is the way it depicts the Jedi Order as a fundamentally flawed organization who were undone by their own hubris, which ultimately led to the rise of the Empire. And now Luke's own moment of weakness has led to his nephew running away to join a new fascist movement and become the next Vader. So it makes perfect sense that this would cause Luke to come to the conclusion that the Jedi are the source of all the galaxy's turmoil and decide that the best thing would be for them to die out. But ultimately, Luke comes to understand that what the Jedi Order represents for many people is too important to let go of. Hope. That's why he eventually chooses to return to the fight and be the legendary figure that everyone expects him to be. At the movie's climax, Luke faces Kylo Ren but does not engage in a lightsaber fight with him. Instead, he projects his image onto Crate and stands his ground while the Resistance make their escape to fight another day. This is perfectly in line with the philosophies of the Jedi set up in the previous films. Remember in The Empire Strikes Back when Yoda said this?
A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack.
Sacrificing himself in order to preserve hope in the galaxy was the most Jedi-like thing Luke could have done, much more so than doing some flashy tricks with a lightsaber. Hell, his big moment of heroism in Return of the Jedi is when he tosses away his lightsaber and refuses to continue fighting Vader, because he knows that giving in to his aggression is exactly what the Emperor wants. All of this is played magnificently by Mark Hamill, who gives the best performance of his career and maybe the best performance in any Star Wars film. I get why people loved seeing Luke as a badass swordsman in The Mandalorian, but I just think The Last Jedi is a much more interesting and compelling take on his character. And now let's talk about Rey, the protagonist of the sequel trilogy. After The Force Awakens came out, there was a lot of debate surrounding who she really was. We know she's a scavenger from Jakku, but why is she so strong with the Force? Who were her parents and why did they abandon her? Could she be related to one of the legacy characters like Luke or Obi-Wan Kenobi or Glup Shitto? The Last Jedi offers an answer that's much simpler than we could have expected, but in retrospect is the only one that's satisfying from a narrative perspective. Rey is a nobody. Her parents are just junk traders who sold her off for drinking water and never had any intention of coming back for her. She's strong with the Force because some people are just more naturally attuned to it than others, the way that some people in our world have a more natural gift for singing from a young age. This twist is brilliant on multiple levels. Firstly, it acts as a perfect parallel to Luke discovering that Darth Vader is his father in The Empire Strikes Back. The most devastating thing Luke could have possibly learned in that moment was that the idealized version of his father that he'd built up in his head was not who Anakin truly was. And the most devastating thing for Rey to learn in this key moment in The Last Jedi is that she doesn't have some special lineage. She really is a nobody who was abandoned by her parents instead of the long-lost descendant of a legendary Jedi. That's a much more meaningful and narratively logical revelation than any of the more fanservice-y theories people cooked up on Reddit. And in addition, this twist serves as a reminder that the Force isn't something you inherit from your genes or that only a few people have. It flows through all living things, and anyone, even a lowly scavenger whose own parents didn't want her, could be the hero that the galaxy needs. We're so used to fantasy stories being focused on bloodlines and chosen one narratives that this was a refreshing change of pace. It sure would be a shame if the next movie completely ruined this twist by backtracking on it and revealing that she was actually related to the Emperor the whole time. Can you imagine?
You are a Palpatine.
Okay, now moving on to Kylo Ren, aka the best character in this trilogy. While he definitely made an impression in The Force Awakens, there was definitely an overwhelming feeling that he was just another Vader. A fallen Jedi apprentice who had succumbed to the dark side and turned on his family. That was of course intentional, since the character idolizes Vader, but in The Last Jedi, Kylo Ren truly steps out of his grandfather's shadow and comes into his own as a character, symbolized by him destroying his Vader-esque helmet early on. The dynamic that develops between Rey and Kylo Ren is one of the most compelling parts of the film, with both Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley giving terrific performances as their characters slowly come to understand one another, and there are even hints of mutual attraction between them, culminating in this legendary moment. Throughout the film, Kylo's connection with Rey and Driver's brilliantly conflicted performance lead us to believe that she can redeem him just as Luke redeemed his father. And that seems to be where the story is going when Kylo betrays and kills Snoke. But then The Last Jedi offers a clever and timely subversion of that plot point from Return of the Jedi. Instead of joining Rey, Kylo declares that he just wants to usurp his former master's position of power and tries to emotionally manipulate Rey into joining his side, insisting that he's the only person who will ever understand her, and trying to get her to turn her back on her true friends and family. Contrary to what the fans would have you believe, Star Wars has always been inherently political. The original trilogy contained metaphors for the Vietnam War, the prequels are partly inspired by the War on Terror, and Kylo Ren is a stand-in for the modern-day alt-right. An entitled man-child driven by petty anger and desire for power who paints himself as a tragic, misunderstood figure, but throws temper tantrums when things don't go his way and rejects the opportunity to truly grow up and accept responsibility for redeeming himself. In other words, he's the perfect Star Wars villain for our current political climate. And now let's talk about Finn. Like a lot of people, I wasn't crazy about his storyline in the movie when I first saw it. I thought it was completely unnecessary and just dragged the story down to a complete halt. But over the years, I've really come around on it. At the start of The Force Awakens, we're introduced to Finn as a stormtrooper who decides he's done with the war and tries to desert before he finds himself getting unwittingly involved with the Resistance. The key thing to remember is that Finn's primary goal in that movie is getting away from the conflict, not actually fighting the First Order. The only reason he joins the fight is because he wants to rescue Rey. It's only really in The Last Jedi that he truly becomes invested in the Resistance's cause, and this development is brought about by his relationship with new character Rose Tico. Rose, played by the likeable Kelly Marie Tran, is a plucky mechanic who idolizes the Resistance heroes. When she first meets Finn, she acts like a bit of a fangirl because she knows him as the stormtrooper who renounced the First Order, and is then disappointed when she realizes he's trying to flee. Over the course of their mission together, Finn becomes touched by Rose's unwavering dedication to the Resistance cause, and she ends up inspiring him the way his story initially inspired her. He becomes the man that she wanted him to be when they first met. By the end of the film, he's even prepared to sacrifice himself to save the Resistance, something the Finn from one movie ago would not have done. And as for the Casino Planet setting that everybody hates, I didn't like it the first time either, but now I've completely changed my tune. It's a visually creative location full of weird aliens much like the Cantina from the first Star Wars movie, and I've really come to appreciate the social commentary about how the 1% live lives of luxury built on exploitation of the poor. I also really like the character of DJ because he's a clever inversion of the character archetype we've seen before. Like Han Solo and Lando Calrissian, DJ is a charming rogue who's hired to assist the heroes on their mission, but where Han and Lando were both scoundrels with a heart of gold whose consciences ultimately led them to do the right thing, DJ really is a selfish bastard who doesn't have any principles, and betrays the heroes as soon as it's no longer convenient for him to side with them.
DJ is like he's a cynic. He believes that good guys and bad guys are just... they're just basically the same.
And the final character arc that I want to talk about is Poe Dameron. Given a more substantial role than he had in The Force Awakens, Oscar Isaac's devil-may-care Resistance pilot is here given an arc that goes in unexpected directions, but ultimately makes him into an even more interesting character. From the opening scene, it's established that Poe is a gifted pilot and a brave leader, but also a reckless one, with a serious hero complex. Against Leia's wishes, he leads a costly counterattack on the First Order dreadnought, and a few pilots lose their lives in the process despite the mission ultimately being a success. Poe is a good man, but he has a fairly simplistic idea of heroism, something he must learn to overcome if he's ever going to be the leader that Leia knows he can be. Poe spends much of the movie at odds with Laura Dern's Vice Admiral Holdo, whose plan to evacuate the Resistance he views as cowardly and futile. Because of how these stories usually go, we naturally expect that Poe, the rebellious maverick, will be proven right, and Holdo, the stuck-up authority figure, will have to acknowledge that she misjudged him. But instead, the exact opposite happens. Holdo is revealed to have been in the right, and Poe comes to realize that not everything can be solved by always trying to be the hero. A lot of people seem to think that this emasculates Poe's character or makes him into an idiot, but I don't really agree with that. I think it's really interesting to see a character evolve from a trigger-happy flyboy to somebody who appreciates the value of retreating to fight another day. Again, he was cool in The Force Awakens, but he didn't have any character arc or development, and here he becomes a compelling three-dimensional figure. Okay, I've covered all the major character arcs, so now let's go on to the next section of the video. Okay, here's a hot take for you. From a purely technical point of view, The Last Jedi is the strongest film in the entire saga. This is an absolutely beautiful film with some of my favorite shots in the entire franchise. Johnson's use of the color red is particularly striking, especially in the design of Snoke's throne room or the way he uses the red salt on Crate as a substitute for blood on the battlefield. And then, of course, there's the best shot in all of Star Wars. Most modern Star Wars movies and TV shows are filled with homages and callbacks to the saga's original entries, but it's easy to forget that the original Star Wars movie was an homage to the cinema of the past, like Flash Gordon movie serials or Akira Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress. Johnson understands this, and so he works an homage to Wings into the Canto Bight introduction sequence, which fucking rules. Really, Johnson's direction might be the most creative the series has ever had. I especially love the way he frames the scenes where Rey and Kylo communicate through the Force. I mean, the fact that there are people who can look at this movie and say that Rian Johnson is an incompetent filmmaker, it's mind-boggling to me. That's all I can say. One of the fan criticisms of The Last Jedi that has always baffled me is that the humor is somehow out of place or doesn't fit Star Wars. I mean, look, comedy is subjective, and it's fine if you don't find the jokes funny, but to say that jokes and silly moments have no place in this franchise is objectively untrue. They've been part of its DNA since the very beginning. If you don't believe me, why don't I show you 3 examples from the original trilogy, the movies that you hold on such a pedestal.
Everything's perfectly all right now. We're fine. We're all fine here now. Thank you. How are you?
R2.
George Lucas conceived Star Wars as a mix of lighthearted Flash Gordon-style romp and classical myth, so yes, there's an epic lore and plenty of dramatic stakes, but there are also loads of jokes and fun moments to keep viewers of all ages entertained. And for the most part, I think the humor in The Last Jedi works because it fits the characters. When we first met Poe in The Force Awakens, he was still making cheeky quips even when confronted by the menacing Kylo Ren, so of course it's within his character to troll General Hux over the intercom like he does at the start of this movie. Again, humor is subjective, but you can find something unfunny and still acknowledge that it fits the tone of the series, because it does. Now, here's an example of something that annoyed me the first time I saw The Last Jedi that doesn't annoy me anymore. In The Force Awakens, the character of Supreme Leader Snoke was introduced as the new big bad of the trilogy. All we knew was that he was the big boss of the First Order and the one responsible for turning Kylo Ren to the dark side. For the next 2 years, fan theories about Snoke's true identity were all over the internet. Where did he come from? Could he actually be Darth Plagueis, the Sith Lord who trained Emperor Palpatine? Or Glup Shitto? But in The Last Jedi, Snoke's backstory isn't really explored at all, and he ends up being killed by Kylo Ren. Initially, I didn't like this choice. I thought it was lazy and wasted the character of Snoke. But again, my opinion on it has really changed across multiple viewings. The inherent problem with Snoke is that he's something we've seen before in Star Wars. A cackling old guy who sits in a chair acting as the devil on his apprentice's shoulder. In other words, he's Palpatine 2.0, and that probably would have remained the case no matter what kind of backstory they cooked up for him. His primary role in the story of this trilogy was in service of a much more interesting villain, Kylo Ren. At the end of the day, we didn't need some grand reveal about Snoke's backstory because we can already fill in the blanks based on what the movies have provided us with. He's a worshipper of the dark side who saw an opportunity when the Empire fell and rallied a bunch of Imperial sympathizers to impose a new dictatorial regime over the galaxy. Boom. There's your backstory. Just like with Rey's lineage, tying Snoke to somebody we already recognize might have satisfied Reddit, but it wouldn't have done anything for the story, and at the end of the day, that's what matters. Eliminating Snoke from the picture and making Kylo Ren the new Supreme Leader is another example of The Last Jedi moving the franchise beyond just repeating the original trilogy. It sure would be a shame if the next movie undid that by just bringing Palpatine back from the dead. Ha ha ha! Can you imagine?
Somehow Palpatine returned.
You were the chosen one!
Okay, here's a criticism of The Last Jedi that really bugs me. People actually complain that Leia using the Force makes no sense because we've never seen her do it before. Because, you know, it's not like 30 years have passed between the events of Return of the Jedi and the sequel trilogy during which her brother, a very famous Jedi, could have taught her a few tricks, right? Admittedly, the visual of Leia flying through space in that one scene looks a little bit goofy, but given that this was the first Star Wars film released after Carrie Fisher's death, the sight of Leia using the Force on screen for the first time, while her theme plays triumphantly in the background, was really moving to me. I don't really have much else to say on this particular matter, I just wanted to get it off my chest. This was another scene that sparked furious discussion. After the Resistance is evacuated in a series of escape pods, Holdo stays behind on the main ship. She then makes the jump to light speed and rams right into the First Order's flagship, splitting it in two and sacrificing herself in the process. Putting aside canon or whether or not this breaks the established lore, can we just appreciate how awesome the moment itself is? The way the whole film briefly goes completely silent, no music, no sound effects, no nothing, as it lingers on the moment of the crash and never fails to give me goosebumps. This is the kind of cinematic spectacle that we expect from Star Wars. And no, it would not have been better if Admiral Akbar had been the one on the ship, because Admiral Akbar is a minor character who says one memorable line in the original trilogy, and that is the entire basis of your nostalgic connection to him. I don't care what he does in the comics or the expanded universe, it doesn't matter, he's a minor character, that's it. Please, shut up about Admiral Akbar. I would argue that The Last Jedi is the most thematically rich movie in the entire franchise to date. Contrary to popular belief, this is not a movie whose central philosophy is let the past die. It's a film that preaches the importance of learning from the past without letting it hold you back. Johnson works in a few callbacks to the original trilogy here, but he's a filmmaker who understands that fanservice works best if it also serves the narrative and character development. He brings back Yoda because he's the best character to deliver the particular words of wisdom Luke needs to hear in that moment. He mirrors this iconic shot from A New Hope because it's a beautiful way of bringing Luke's journey full circle. It's much more meaningful than, hey, you remember this thing? Well, here it is again! Which, as much as I enjoy The Mandalorian, is literally all the second season is. It's just shit that you recognize for the sake of you recognizing shit. It's cool in the moment, but it doesn't actually add anything to the universe. This is also a Star Wars movie that's actually about what Star Wars means to people. The final scene of the movie is a group of oppressed children we saw earlier inspiring each other with stories of Luke Skywalker's heroic sacrifice, showing how his legend will live on and continue to enthrall future generations. And one of those kids is then shown using the Force and looking up to the stars, once again reminding us that heroes in this universe can come from anywhere. I think it's really telling that a lot of fans immediately wanted to know who this kid was related to, therefore completely missing the point of the scene. Now look, I don't think The Last Jedi is a perfect film. Yes, it's a bit weird that Holdo doesn't tell anyone in the Resistance her plan instead of just keeping it from Poe. Yes, it continues the sequel trilogy's wasting of Lupita Nyong'o and Gwendolyn Christie. And yes, I could have lived the rest of my life quite happily without seeing Luke milk that sea creature. But these complaints aren't enough to drag the movie down for me. It's a beautifully crafted, thematically resonant, and narratively ambitious entry in a beloved franchise that dares to take the story in brand new directions rather than relying on familiar iconography and playing it safe. Even though I still really like The Force Awakens, I think this is the movie in the sequel trilogy that time is going to be the kindest to. And it's frankly heartbreaking that the current fan response to it will likely scare Disney away from ever making a Star Wars property this bold and risky again. But hey, at least we'll always have this one.